Hello and welcome to Coffee with Kathleen. Believe it or not, we are in the 20s episode-wise. So if you have been watching since the very beginning, I would just like to say thank you to you for dealing with me over these last couple of years. And if you're new to Coffee with Kathleen, it's a good time to drop in. So I am a very positive person, as many of you might know. And having said that, there's a lot going on right now in the world, for people at work. There's some things going on, personal life wise for myself and for other people that I know. And so the net result of that is that I've noticed a lot of people lately are just really struggling in one way or another. And so the question here that we are going to play around with a little bit today is about handling difficulty. And I've talked about this in other ways before, about ways of thinking about difficulty and things like that. But I'm going to get really kind of precise for the times that we are in and the things that we're seeing, some of which are unprecedented. And I'm going to talk specifically about what I think we need to do. And I'm going to do all of that without getting political in the slightest, because that is not what we do here at Coffee with Kathleen. Instead, we think about what connects us and not about what divides us. And what connects us as being part of the human experience is that we all have hard things, difficult things that we have to deal with. And right now, regardless of what you think or believe, there is a lot of that. So with that, thinking about those circumstances that make things more difficult for us, let's take a drink of our coffee, because caffeine makes everything easier. And then let's think about those circumstances that make things much more difficult for us, that challenge us in our lives, sometimes to the very core. And we go through these things on many different levels, personally, socially, work-wise, family-wise, society-wise. And we do these in small ways. And also there are big macro ways in which, our lives are being impacted by these difficult circumstances. So today we're going to talk about three things that we can do when things like this occur. So firstly, and this is going to sound like the plainest advice ever, but firstly, we just handle it in a straightforward way. We are aware. We understand that what we're going through is difficult. We understand that we're going to come through the other side potentially as a changed person. And then we take one or more deep breaths and we simply allow it to be, and we move through it with as much grace and equanimity as we possibly can. And so to think about this, I'm going to read you something that Leon Wieseltier wrote from his book, Kaddish. It's called Sink So As to Rise. There are circumstances that must shatter you. And if you are not shattered, then you have not understood your circumstances. In such circumstances, it is a failure for your heart not to break. And it is pointless to put up a fight, for a fight will blind you to the opportunity that has been presented by your misfortune. Do you wish to persevere pridefully in the old life? Of course you do. The old life was a good life, but it is no longer available to you. It has been carried away irreversibly. So there is only one thing to be done. Transformation must be met with transformation. Where there was the old life, let there be the new life. Do not persevere. Dignify the shock. Sink so as to rise. And I think, we've all heard the saying, it's always darkest before the dawn and things like this. And I think this is a a more expanded way of thinking about that concept. And I think it's a way of really getting connected to the difficulty that's happening and to understand that it's going to leave us changed. And so we work with this difficulty in the way that we just allow it to be. And we understand who we are. And we understand who we have to be now in the face of what we see ahead of us. And so that is a kind of radical acceptance. And it's a radical acceptance of change and of difficulty at the same time. A slightly different way of thinking about this is offered to us by Jamaica Kincaid, who says, "You cry when you're born because your lungs expand. You breathe." I think that's really kind of significant. You come into the world crying, and it's a sign that you're alive. So I'm a person who finds it reasonably easy to cry, and I do it often. And so if I'm crying because my heart is breaking, then it's a sign that I'm alive and that everything is that's happening is supposed to be there. And then having a way to kind of work with that is important. So having said that, now, like, we're in difficulty, we're in the hardest, most heartbreaking times potentially, and we're accepting and understanding and allowing that to be with us and to change us. And then what? Well, secondly, and this is not a deflection from the first point at all, it's in harmony with the first point, but we look at what's good. We seek out things that we know are going to bring us joy or inspiration or motivation for the next thing. Maybe Coffee with Kathleen is one of those things for you. I hope so. I want it to be. But we seek out those things that show us there's still good left, that there's people who believe the way that we do. There are people who are fighting what we're fighting for, who want to support us, who want to bear the brunt of the tragedy. We know there are people, perhaps you are even one of them, for whom difficult times bring out the very best in their nature. And we want that. We want difficult times to show us what we're capable of, and what others around us are capable of. And then we want to work together toward, making those just a little bit better. So as one example, earlier this year, California experienced devastating fires, absolutely horrible. And a number of people had their hearts broken by that situation. So what did people do in response to these wildfires? They mobilized, they organized, they came together to raise money, to foster animals, to help their neighbors, to donate things, to look at different ways of fire prevention, to conserve water, to do all sorts of different things that ultimately, make their communities stronger and better. And that was in response, of course, to an absolute tragedy. And so we can look for those examples. So Fred Rogers would tell a story, Mr. Rogers, good old Mr. Rogers, from whom hopefully we all learn some things. But he would say when he was a boy and he would see scary things on the news, he said, "My mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping." To this day, especially in times of disaster, I remember my mother's words, and I'm always comforted by realizing that there are still so many helpers, so many caring people in this world. So, part of deciding what's good, part of really looking for what's good, means that we need to understand what we stand for and who we're wanting to be when something bad happens, so that we're ready. We're ready to be those people in the face of that kind of tragedy. And as part of that, we also need to understand, who we're listening to, what's in our environment, what we're seeking out, what kind of media we're consuming, what that looks like, where we're getting our news, where we're getting our information. And if you want kind of a corollary example to this, just think about this. Have you ever been home? Now, I love spooky movies. So I'm going to start by saying that I belong to a spooky movie crew. We have the most fun going and seeing scary movies and things like that. That is not something I plan on giving up anytime soon, but just think about what happens to you when you watch a really scary movie. Maybe it's late at night and you're home alone and it's dark outside and you're watching this movie and then you hear a sound outside. Like, what happens to you? Of course, you're jumping out of your skin at this sound, right? Are you not? And freaking out a little bit. And why are you doing that? It's because you brought into your environment this spooky thing. I swear, one of the scariest things of all is, it's very dark in many places here in Colorado where I live. And that's beautiful because you can actually see the stars. Nature here is all around and it's absolutely gorgeous. But when you were leaving the movie theater at midnight after having just watched a spooky movie and you said goodbye to all your friends and you had to park way on the other side and you were walking out to your car, there is no scarier walk to the car than the one you take after watching that movie. And that's just an example of what happens when we bring things into our environment. We make them come alive in some way. And so what are you making come alive? Are you doom scrolling or are you positive priming? And I mean, I think we need realism as part of our lives. We need to understand what things are happening so that we can respond to them. It's not like we see news of wildfires and we just turn it off because we don't want to know that that's happening. No, we do need to be plugged into that. But then what we do after that is we need to also plug into the part that's good. What's the response? Who's helping? What are they doing? What are those stories? And how can we seek those things out so that we understand the magnificence and the, generosity that human beings are capable of? Okay. And that's accessible to all of us. So a little dose of realistic and amazing things that are happening all around us all the time, because the essential human nature didn't change overnight. The essential human nature is still good, and we are still able to plug into that and be connected to that, even in the face of, in some cases, unspeakable, horrible tragedy. Okay. And thirdly, and this is going to maybe feel a little repetitious to you as well, because I talk about this a lot, but thirdly, we don't handle things alone, even though I'm on this podcast by myself right now. Every other time when I do Coffee with Kathleen, I do like a solo and then I do a companion. And I do it this way on purpose because we do move through life as ourselves, but we also move through life with other people. And I have so many amazing people in my community that I want you to be able to hear from them as well. There are so many ways you can think about resourcing yourself in difficult times. And this is true of any kind of difficulty that you encounter. So let's talk about that. First, there's just the normal kind of support that you get from your community, your friends, potentially your family, and how you create that community of people who are able to understand who you are and who your heart is and what your heart might need in a given situation. And that's where you call and you're like, hey girl, I really need to talk to you, right? That's that phone call. And a lot of times when we think about resourcing ourselves, we kind of stop there. We just think about the friends who are going to be there to listen to whatever it is that we need them to listen to, and we stop. But that is not a place to stop, not in a difficult time. We need to think about building layers or ripples or whatever fun word you want to use. We need to think about creating a support structure that's really much more of an infrastructure that goes beyond that basic support that we get from our close family and our close friends and our general community. And we need to think about, okay, how do I create a community of people who are going through something similar to what I'm going through? I think, in the common parlance, we literally call that a support group. And so if what we're going through is a tragedy or of some kind, or an illness of some kind, or we have a persistent condition of some kind that we need support around, we can often find, whether that's online or in real life, a community of people who are going through a similar thing. And then that provides us support in a different way. So Audre Lorde says, without community, there is no liberation, only the most vulnerable and temporary armistice between an individual and her oppression. So without community, there is no liberation. And liberation is ultimately what we're working toward. We can also get support that's more on a professional note. So again, thinking about this resourcing concept, we can get support from therapists, coaches, mental health professionals of all kinds. And I think we need to normalize looking for this kind of support and receiving this kind of support. And so in the interests of normalizing it, I am going to say to you that I am currently in therapy and I am really enjoying it. On the professional side, I also have a professional coach that I have. I have a peer group. I belong to a professional organization that provides this as a resource. And I also have other mentors, people over time that I go to for various things that I think about as more of a professional support network, either because they are professionally decided that as a profession, this is what they do, or because they support me in my professional life. And there's a lot of bleed over. I mean, there are plenty of work things that my therapist gets to hear about because that's such a major component of my life. And I decided to go to therapy, not when I was in a foxhole of difficulty, but when I was feeling pretty darn good about things. So why did I decide? Most people decide to go to therapy when they're at the end of their rope. I would say that's a time when it's almost too late. You want to get there when you still have lots of rope left, because you just want to be the best you that you can be, or because you want to make even more rope accessible to you, or whatever. And this very poor metaphor that I'm constructing for you of you climbing up a rope for some God knows what reason. But I'm just saying, I think it's an amazing opportunity. I am doing a kind of therapy. I'm doing talk therapy, but I'm also doing a kind of therapy called neurofeedback. And that is literally where electrodes are attached to my head. It is not in any way painful, but something that I've learned about the way that my brain waves and my brain work is that I don't have very many relaxation waves or states available or accessible to me in my brain. I'm very go, 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 go. And even though I meditate, which is, by the way, another great way of resourcing yourself, those states are just not readily accessible to me. And the neuro feedback process that I go through makes those states more and more and more accessible to me over time. And I'm really appreciative for how that works with the talk therapy that's accessible to me from my therapist. So that is another kind of resourcing that I would recommend. And then you can also look at resourcing, obviously, from spiritual communities. And for me, I'm not a super religious person, so that spiritual community for me looks like people who are also engaged in mindfulness and in meditation, and who can look beyond the situation and the emotional support, and who can tap into something larger in life. And I have a spiritual community that we have defined ourselves as a spiritual support community. And we know how to hold space for each other in a very particular way, and how to resource each other through our meditation practices that we have with one another. And so that group is very important and very precious to me. And I am participating in it both as someone who's holding space for others, but who also works with others to hold space. And we also take classes and seek input from outside practitioners of this as well. And that's an important spiritual resourcing, which is, again, very different from the other kinds of resourcing that I'm talking about. And regardless of what kind of spiritual stuff you do and don't believe in, that is accessible to everyone of every particular belief, including no belief whatsoever. And for a no belief whatsoever person, it might look a lot more scientific, or it might be a lot more of a secular meditation or mindfulness or awareness practice. And all of that is valid and all of that is good. And so I would encourage you not to get too hung up here, but also to think about how that can resource you. And then lastly, if something is going on and you don't like it, and you're very unhappy about it, and you feel like something is being thrust upon you that you are not all about it, then I would encourage you to get active, and to really think about how does the world change if you do what you can from where you are, and you just get active around whatever those things are. Maybe one of those things is, you know, saving our natural environment, or it's, the climate change that's going on, or it's, for me, one of the particular causes that I'm really active around is helping to create literacy in the world. Because as a young girl, if I hadn't had my books and they hadn't been my friends, I wouldn't have had any friends. And those books were the best friends that I could possibly imagine having had, because what they did was they opened up worlds to me that were not otherwise accessible to me, and that I was very happy to be a part of. And so as an adult, I want to make sure that all children of the world have access to the same things that I did, so they can imagine what their future lives might be like, and they can tap into other realities. And so how do you get active, though? It's not just a matter of marching in the street with a sign, although that's certainly a valid way to be active. But what you have to do, again, is connect to what you find important, what your values are, and then look for and actively seek out organizations that embody the same values that you do. And those organizations will probably have thought of ways for their members or constituents or donors or whatever to be active. And you can be active in the ways that it makes sense for you. It might be an energy exchange, meaning donating money. It might be time and labor you spend devoting to this organization to making that positive change. It might be, just being involved in your own neighborhood. There are a lot of different ways of getting involved in being an activist. And again, it doesn't mean, standing outside of the Capitol building, screaming at the top of your lungs and waving a sign around. It might mean that, but it doesn't have to mean that. There's so many ways for you to be an activist. And I encourage everyone I know to be a very strong ally and a very strong activist for people in their community that they'd like to stand for and improve. And your community could be halfway around the world, as it is for me, as I've defined the work that I do on the African continent. And it could also be right here at home, as I have defined also for myself the work that I do here in Denver. And I think, that is part of us, really, really stepping forward, claiming our power, and trying to make the world better. And I do think, to the extent that we just don't even know where to start, which so many of us have that problem or that issue, it is just so very simple to get in touch with those in our community, or those national or international organizations that are doing what we think is good work, and saying, hey, I'm here. I'm activated around this concept, and I would love to know what you suggest that I can do next. And they will give you some of those answers. And then you can literally have somebody else's checklist that you just kind of run through as your own playbook for what to do next. And whenever you're tired, the thing is, those organizations allow you to step back and step forward in ways that are flexible for you. And so you can think about that too, how you want to titrate, when you want to step forward, when you have time in your schedule, when you have extra capacity or extra capability where you can donate your hands, heart, mind, etc. And when you need to actually have others in all of the ways that we just talked about resource you so that you can move forward and make that positive difference once again in the world. And so basically, that's it. That's the 3 for magic formula of getting through difficulty. It's getting through it in the straightforward way where we just accept it. It's leaning into and looking for and stocking our environment full of examples of what's good. And it's thirdly, being in community in a variety of different ways that allow us to soak and also spray what's good. Thank you so much.